So we'll go ahead and kick this off. And I want to thank you all for being here. This is a new program for us. It's titled Changing the Mindset on Equipment Lifecycle Management, Vendor Due Diligence, and Security Counsel as a Service. This is a new one for us, so I really appreciate the opportunity to present it to you today and hopefully get some interaction with you via the chat. My esteemed colleague, Kyle Hempy, will be joining me today. Kyle both helped put this presentation together. He's terrific at imagery and design, along with another member of our team, Elizabeth Smith. So I'm very thankful to them. I came from an organization that frankly had a culture of very boring presentation materials. And I'm thankful Cook Security Group livens things up a little bit. And Kyle is huge with that. So he'll be advancing the deck for me today. And he'll also be monitoring the chat. So anytime throughout, if you have a question, want to make a comment, or maybe spend a little more time on one of these topics, please type it into the chat and Kyle will let me know and we'll take a few moments. We're also hoping for a few minutes towards the end as well to answer any questions that you have. And if anybody wants to hang around, we try to be aware of everyone's time. But if anyone wants to hang around past 11 Pacific time, we'll definitely do that and answer a few more questions for you. We had a great list of attendees today. We were a little nervous. We do a lot of these presentations on various topics, and Zoom fatigue has begun to set in. We've heard it from various organizations that we work with. Groups have started to drop. COVID has tired us all as we've gone along, but we are thankful that we do have Zoom and other platforms to be able to continue conversations and share information with you that we hope make sure organizations run a bit better. We have a group today that represents all of the various time zones in the US. Those of you that know Cook Security Group know we primarily have a footprint in the Western US, but through our network, we have customers on the East Coast as well, and some of them are with us today, and we're thankful for that. Also, those that signed up, we've got an esteemed group of attendees from CEOs, CFOs, heads of IT, heads of security, product managers, head of administrative services. So thank you all for being here. My background is primarily or entirely, frankly, in corporate security. So a lot of what I'll be talking about today is security related, security equipment related. If we could please go to the next slide, Kyle. I will try to offer you various viewpoints of how the information we're talking about can apply to perhaps other things within financial facilities. So it's not just about security, I don't think. Security plays into that, but the way equipment is going, the way technology is going, there's not a lot of difference in managing a piece of security equipment than any other piece of IT equipment. They're really technology assets today. If you aren't all the way there yet, you're probably in the process of migrating to that. So I included this image. That it will appear again if this piques your interest at all. But these are 3 new branch designs with COVID in mind, and everyone's talking about what are customers and members going to want going forward, what's going to happen to branch banking. It's endless conversations about it. Everything we've been able to glean is these designs are somewhat of a trend, and they're from zero staffing. Hopefully you can see my cursor there with smart lockers, ATMs. ITMs are becoming more prevalent, and then you've got branches that are micro branch with 1 or 2 people, 2 or 4 people, and 0. So it's all represented here. The other reason for this slide is that a life cycle replacement strategy works on almost anything. Could be flooring in a location or a video wall. They all have lifespans. Some last a lot longer than others. Lockers will last for, who knows, 15 years. whereas electronic equipment tends to life cycle out at about 5 years. So hopefully this will pertain to everyone and all the attendees today. But if you do have a question in particular, feel free to hit that chat. The other thing I want to point out today, I don't get a brag. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. I don't get a brag about the weather very much in Portland, but today it is glorious here. It's sunny already. We haven't gotten much of that lately, so I'm excited today. We're also looking at temperatures close to 80 by the end of the week here. So spring has sprung, and it's good for certainly my attitude, and I hope the rest of you are also having great weather as well. So again, thanks for being here. Next slide, please, Kyle. We're going to start with the various topics. We're going to start with vendor due diligence today. It's how do you select vendors? What should you look for in a vendor? The word partnership comes up a lot. I'm sure you all hear it when you're dealing with the vendors that you work with. And partnership is definitely something we all aspire to have in place. But hope to talk more that it's just not a buzzword, that you should really have some pretty high expectations and a high bar for your vendors, especially in today's world with the risks that we're facing, with the technology out there, how quickly it develops, with the cyber threat out there especially. So many things are attached to the network now that it's never been more important that your vendors be on board with how you do business and how you protect your business. So don't want them to be the weak link. And trust me, I do know, although I spent most of my life working in financial institutions, I retired from Wells Fargo after 20 years and joined Cook Security Group just over a year ago. So I'm definitely becoming a part of a vendor organization, and it's been incredibly enjoyable for me thus far. Prior to leaving Wells Fargo, just some of what I bring to the discussion today. I had global responsibilities there within corporate security for vendors for 10,000 facilities in 39 countries, all of the security equipment requirements and installation for that span, workplace violence, developing a risk methodology for equipment, critical incident response, and being a threat management subject matter expert for the organization. So that's somewhat all baked into what we talk about today. A very large institution like Wells Fargo doesn't do things better than the way you run your organizations. Many of you do incredible things. I've had a chance to work with some of you on the phone, and I hope to get a chance to work with more. What a large organization like Wells Fargo gave me is daily opportunities to have criminal activity happen, cyber events happen. So I guess a lot of volume, and if I can share some of that with you so that you don't have to go through some of those things, that would make me very happy if the experience and all that volume there keeps you from having to go through some of those things. I don't wish things like robberies and cyber attacks on anyone. And although the industry does compete when it comes to protecting each other, I think we're all on the same team and trying to work together on the protection side of things. So with that, we'll get into more of the vendor due diligence. Please, Kyle, next slide. So when we look for a vendor and a vendor partner, trust is one of the biggest things. I'm sure you all, that's the first bar. If you don't trust a vendor, really what's the point of doing business with them? And part of gaining that trust is the vendors that you work with, taking the time to get to know you, how your organization works, what your culture is like, and what your expectations are. And when you're dealing with that vendor or vendors, it should feel like that vendor is working only for you, and other outside groups, although if they bring some experience, learn from there to help improve things at your organization, but they really need to tailor them for you based on their knowledge of what you're looking for. They need to give you good reporting so you know exactly where you stand. Provide awareness of technology trends that is catered just to you. Knowing what you're looking for, knowing what your growth plan is, what sort of markets are you headed for if you are growing. If you're involved in acquisitions, how can a vendor help with that? Because it's a painful, stressful process. We've all got full-time jobs, and many of these other things we get involved in really stretch our organizations. We never have enough staffing. We never have enough funds. So all those things, your vendor should really help you make the most of the people that you have and the funds that you have to spend. And the vendor should bring trained technicians that are also trusted. There's been an investment made in them. Those technicians are taken care of, so there's not a lot of employee turnover. So all that institutional learning that has been done when the technicians have visited your locations, we can build upon that and improve the process based on that. And another great thing is having a 30-day contract termination clause with no financial penalty, so that if it's not working out, you can part ways. Hopefully you don't have to do that, because it's a lot of time selecting vendors. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but your vendor should be keeping you happy. Next slide, please, Kyle. Thank you. So what are the vendor risk compliance and legal expectations? The first one I'll talk about is SOC2 Type 2 compliance or certification. And hopefully you've heard about this, and hopefully you require it of your vendors, especially all the vendors that may attach anything to your network. But it's a very involved process. Cook Security Group is SOC2 Type 2 compliant, as are some of the other vendors. I don't believe they all are, but some of them are. But it is important because it's a verification, and it's an outside audited verification that there are processes in place that will protect your data. Both the data that is exchanged as we potentially do business, or as technicians log into your system to maybe update a piece of software or firmware, update malware protection, that sort of thing. You know that technician's laptop is locked down, that we know there's no malware on it that can be transferred during that process, and that if a piece of equipment fell into the wrong hands through a criminal act or something like that, that your data is encrypted and protected and won't be accessible to others. You want to make sure your vendors have enough insurance in case something unfortunate happens, that there's insurance coverage to help right that situation. You want to know that the vendor's employees have had background checks and drug testing, and that when they show up at your site, they're 100% there to get you back online as quickly as possible, and keep your systems running efficiently and with a high degree of quality. You want your vendor's equipment to all be cyber hardened, and that password protection that's set up both for your equipment and the vendor's equipment is protected. Something as simple as password protection really sort of sparked all this awareness that we all have now, especially with what I'll call secondary systems. That would be more of the security systems and building management systems for the facilities professionals out there, of protecting them. That first, at least in my awareness, Target was one of the first ones that came several years ago to the forefront of a major attack that got tons of press. Password issues with that, with vendors and that sort of thing. You want to make sure your vendors are compliant with all federal, state, and local laws and certification requirements for their employees and systems. And then you want your vendor to have a healthy profit and loss. You want to see if they have a track record of being financially sound. If you get involved with a major project, that vendor may do an outlay with other suppliers. And if those suppliers have had a bad experience with that vendor, it could be difficult to get all the equipment you need when you need it for your project. Next slide, please, Kyle. Let's take a look at vendor contracts. What does a good one look like? Having it be on your paper, written right by you, is a really good idea. Having that 30-day no penalty clause in there for termination is just a nice insurance policy to have on your side. A big one is if you truly have expectations of when you want a vendor to be on your site to fix an outage of some kind, doing a risk-based time requirement within the contract is a great idea. An example of that would be an alarm panel that won't arm at the end of the day. You probably want a 2 or 4 hour pretty speedy response to that versus changing a lock on a safe deposit box. You might wait a day or two if a customer or member is not waiting to get something out of that safe deposit box that they need for travel, when we used to do that, or that kind of thing. Things are picking up, so I hope we'll all get a chance to do more of that soon. But having travel documents or personal documents in there may need you to get in there very much more quickly. Doing an annual schedule, this is truly up to you, but certainly recommended. An annual scheduled preventative maintenance visit can be a great investment in keeping all of your equipment functioning optimally. You can also save some service work that doesn't need to be done immediately and do it at the same time as the PM to maximize the time and expense surrounding that. But generally, keeping your existing equipment working throughout its lifespan optimally, that preventative maintenance visit is a great idea to get in front, to avoid some of those catastrophic failures that can add to a lot more expense. Meeting with your vendors quarterly to review their performance and get data from them, another great idea. You want to having and treating that vendor like like one of your employees, I think, is a great idea. If you start to see a decline in service, start offering suggestions and voicing your expectations rather than waiting until things are so bad that you have to seek out another vendor and spend all the time doing the selection process for that. Using that performance improvement plan like you might do for an employee could also be a useful item with one of your vendors to improve service if you're having any issues. But keeping that communication open and often scheduled is a great idea and will help things run much better. Next slide, please, Kyle. Best practices for vendor RFPs. So I will tell you in the past, both selecting security equipment and selecting vendors for years, the trend was that I could make my own decisions on both of those fronts, and the vendors would show up but have tremendous impact on others, especially facilities and whoever the leadership is trying to run whatever facility is being supported by that vendor. Over the last few years of my time with Wells Fargo, a great teaching moment for me was taking the time up front, and rather than having it be a faster decision process when I'm making a decision alone, is assembling a team of stakeholders. Takes more time to make these selections, but the end result is so much better that I believe it's totally worth the time. So anytime a vendor request for proposal is out there or major security equipment decisions are being made, assembling a group of stakeholders that can work with you to meet with a group of vendors if that's the decisioning that's taking place. Having a set of questions that pull out the experience that you're looking for out of these vendors. You already know ahead of time from talking with the stakeholders what's important to them, and letting the process really land you on the exact right vendor, and you've already got stakeholder buy-in with that. It just makes everyone invested in making the relationship with that vendor be much more successful. Um, team scoring it does take some time, but it does yield that great end result. And then based on that and the investment that you've made, perhaps doing a multi-year, like a 3-year award is a great idea that helps prolong that investment that you've made in selecting that vendor. I do want to point out one item I've seen a number of times, and that is to beware of extreme low bids. Almost every one of these RFPs, I'll tell you up front, when I met with all the vendors, I told them right up front that I was not looking for an extreme low bid, or what is kind of known within the industry as sort of buying the bid. And the idea that some companies have is to come in with that extreme low bid, and they hope to either get even more work with you to help offset, because essentially they're signing up for a loss right up the front. That extreme low bid is, if it's 30 or 40% less than all the other bidders that you're working with, there's a good chance that whoever placed that bid is not making money. And it's not a sustainable arrangement unless they either renegotiate their terms after the first year or they get more work with you. What if those things don't work out? Then that investment you've just made is forcing you to look for another vendor, invest more time getting that group of stakeholders back together. So when you start putting this process together, it's good to know what is the going rate for a given area. It does vary greatly across the country between different markets, but having an idea of market pricing. And I'm certainly not saying that you don't want to negotiate the right price for the right level of quality. None of us want to spend more than we have to, but going too low, I've never seen that work out. As time goes on, quality starts to decline. Every time that vendor that submitted that low bid goes out there losing money, so that they cringe every time they have to go out there. It doesn't work out for you. It doesn't work out for the vendor either. So please be aware of that. But doesn't hurt to try and negotiate that price either. So that's part of a healthy economy. Next slide, please, Kyle. Another trend is a lot of financial institutions are deciding that they really want to focus on their core business of running that financial institution, and outsourcing some of these specialized services is something that a lot of institutions are beginning to take, beginning to sign up for. So what you get with that is the systems that you signed up for with this remote services, there's a person who does all the patching and firmware updates for you. So your IT folks can focus on other aspects of IT, or maybe just oversee what's going on. But this managed service is taking care of that for you. The vendor that you're working with hopefully offers you several different brands, so you can pick the best brand of equipment that meets your needs and your business requirements, helping you to solve some of your pain points, helping to keep down that platform creep of having 5 or 6 or 8 different platforms when perhaps 1 or 2 would do it. In today's world, where we're having to constantly patch things and update firmware, it's a time-consuming process, and the lower number of platforms make it easier to manage and safer in protecting your institution. Knowing when to make that migration to the next different platform that better meets your needs. Over time, some manufacturers don't keep up with the current trends in product development, and you decided that this one no longer meets your needs. Having that vendor managed service help you with that migration can save you a lot of time. I know these platform shifts can be troubling from a time standpoint. I mean, with all the work that you have to do, having to train everyone on a new platform can be daunting, but your trusted vendor and with a managed service can really help you do that much more efficiently. Next slide, please, Kyle. We have assembled a vendor due diligence checklist that covers many of the areas that I just went through, and I'd be happy to send this to you. There'll also be a slide at the end where I'll pitch this again that has my email address where if you'd like to see this and sort of run this checklist through your organization, either now or keep it for the future. We would enjoy it if this becomes useful to you and allows you to just walk through your organization and assess where you are. Or maybe you're getting ready to look at a new vendor, and this checklist might help you with that process. So we hope these tools that we offer will be helpful for you. I'll take a momentary break there to see if anybody writes any questions into the chat as we get into the next subject matter. Changing gears here. We go to the next slide, please, Kyle. So we'll begin now talking about equipment lifecycle management. As far as security equipment goes, this is still a fairly new trend. I know it's been around forever with laptops, desktops, servers, and that sort of thing. But again, with that equipment becoming more like technology assets, I can tell you in my history, it was pretty common years ago. One, there wasn't a lot of patching going on in past years. It's been within the last few years that's been a requirement, really. But years ago, a lot of the old equipment wasn't attached to the network the way it is today. And you could keep equipment around far past its life. You have quality problems, to be sure, but based on how budgeting is done, security equipment's always competed with all the other expenditures that an institution has, and things that go directly towards building that institution, serving the customer, tend to be where those investments went. The good news is security equipment now does more than just security. It can help you manage your branch during COVID. It can give you an idea of customer behavior through heat mapping in your branch or admin locations. So you can definitely utilize the equipment much more today than you could before. So hopefully this life cycle discussion, you can start factoring this into not keeping camera equipment around 12 years anymore. We all used to do that, but that trend is going away now. It's very risky these days to keep things around that long. Next slide, please, Kyle. So platform pain points. As equipment tends to be in a manufacturer's inventory, the longer it's there, the more likely they're rolling something new out, and they may not support the old equipment with software updates. And eventually it can become very risky to your institution. When you compare that to our smartphones, we all know there's some sort of planned obsolescence within a lot of this equipment. But after a number of years, it's a challenge from a storage capability, from an update capability, to be able to continue using that equipment indefinitely. Older equipment, there tends to be a lack of integration. Today, currently, the trend is towards integrating video access control and alarms into essentially all one system that functions well with each other and gives you a lot more data than ever before. Video verification of alarms is becoming much more common, where your alarm monitoring company, at the time an alarm is generated from an institution, you not only get an alarm notification, but you also get a video image of what's going on there. Sure, you can't always tell exactly what's going on, but oftentimes you can, and it can really help verify there is an actual need for a police response, for instance, or a verified need that it's a false alarm and you can cancel it before you roll law enforcement and potentially suffer those big alarm fees these days that seem to be, they're in the hundreds of dollars now after an occurrence or two, so it can be quite expensive. Another tool that the newer systems tend to have are app-based video access that you can have on your smartphone. If you've ever gotten a call at 3 a.m. that something happened at one of your locations, and the only way to find out what's going on there is to either drive there, which may not be safe or feasible, or logging onto a laptop, finding the right server, finding the right platform and software that you're using for that location, and then pulling it up and searching around. An app on your phone is immediate access to you. Oh, there we are. Next slide, please, Kyle. Some process pain points. One of those is growth is taking you into a new market where it's higher risk than you're used to. You don't have criteria in place for measuring risk at each of your locations, plus new locations. Having one common thing in the financial industry, at least in institutions that I worked for until recently, audits tend to be daunting. So the more you write down, the more you can be audited. The trend now is to document everything, and I'm sure you all do that. But looking over your policies, reviewing them at least annually, comparing them with the industry and your peers is a great idea. Not having a life cycle replacement strategy, another pain point, and project funding. The next couple slides, we'll go over some ways to cure some of these pain points. Next slide, please, Kyle. Developing a policy around life cycle replacement is a great idea. It gives you a chance to share it with senior leadership within your organization. They can see numbers. They can see how often you're going to be replacing this equipment, what the impacts might be on budgeting, collecting data that helps you with that data. Your vendors can help with that as well. Every year for that annual visit that they make for preventative maintenance, they could be doing a survey of exactly the numbers of equipment that you have, location, what's the age of it, how well is it working, and provide you all that data, provide you access to the data via a secure link so that you can pull it up at budget time. It eliminates the need for having to do constant business cases every time you need a new piece of equipment. Having that critical information, you can just run a query into a database of what are all the sites next year where the equipment's going to reach the 5-year mark. Lets you then decide how much you want to budget. Next slide, please, Kyle. Using the word risk a lot here, but risk applies to everything these days. Really, there should be a risk-driven reason for pretty much how we make all our decisions. If you haven't utilized a service called CAP Index, I strongly recommend it. This is not part of Cook Security Group at all. It's an outside service, but I've used it for years and totally recommend it. It's useful for any address in the U.S. It could actually be a bare piece of dirt. If you're going to build a new location or put in an ATM, one of the best ways to find out what your risk is for that location is to pull up one of these reports. The next slide, I'll go through an example of one for you. But it's a 10-page report for each location that you request a report for. I recommend using that data and compared with your in-house data of what's going on at a given location to come up with that risk. And you can have an ongoing list of all of your locations along with their risk rating, and share it with your organization so everybody knows exactly what type what risk level they're sitting in, why they have certain types of equipment, why they don't. And it really establishes that consistency factor out there and maximizes your spend. Putting the same high level of security in every location really isn't necessary. You do need a baseline to be sure to comply with regulatory requirements, but locations that have a lot more crime generally need a lot more mitigation strategy around additional equipment. Next slide, please, Kyle. So this is an example, and this happens to be the crime report for Cook Security Group headquarters in Portland. It is near the airport. So this report gives you a numerical score for your location, and then it gives you the crime for the exact location of your facility, going out 3 miles and then going out 6 miles. Another cool factor is it gives you 3 years of history of crime for that location and projected 3 years into the future of crime. So I would strongly suggest pulling up one of these reports for all of your locations and ATMs every 3 years. And if you have high-risk locations, perhaps you do those annually. The scoring goes like this. 0 to 2,000 is the numbers. A score of 100 is exactly what you always want. That is average crime per capita for the US. And trust me, that's the kind of place where you want your children or grandkids to go to school, you want to have your home and that sort of thing. Most institutions don't start doing additional mitigation strategies until the score hits 500. Scores over 1,000 tend to be more high crime inner city areas where there's a lot going on around the clock that really contributes to that score. These things do require a little bit of interpretation. I'll give you an example. I pulled one for a new facility in Portland that is in the downtown area, and the score came up at 900, which is fairly high. This particular facility was only open from 8 to 5. Employees tended not to work late at that location, and most of the crime occurred after midnight. So there's no ATM there, there's no customer usage of any of the facilities, and the employees are gone. So the high risk factor there really didn't affect the facility all that much. But let's say there's an ATM there, that score definitely is something to keep an eye on, because after midnight, anyone who uses that ATM could be subject to a higher rate of crime, discrete crime, opportunistic crime, and that sort of thing for that area. So if you haven't used these, I strongly recommend employing these into your risk strategy and your risk measurement process. Next slide, please, Kyle. The importance of having that database access is, I went for years, to be honest with you, of not having a good key of where I had equipment everywhere, and it makes things an absolute nightmare for budgeting and tracking. And when you get that question from senior leadership of how many of these systems am I going to have to replace next year, not having that information at your fingertips makes things very difficult. It's more difficult to get that funding for what you want to do. So you definitely want that access. Either have it yourself or perhaps have your vendor manage it for you. And you want to have secure online access to glean that information if your vendor is supplying it. Next slide, please, Kyle. Another great trend is video surveillance as a managed service. And again, it plays into that, allowing financial institutions to focus on what they do best, and that is running their institution. Some want to continue complete control over their video surveillance. Others would like to outsource some of that. The benefits to outsourcing is definitely selecting the right equipment that is very open architecture. And the benefit of open architecture versus some of the older brand equipment that was more of a self-contained appliance. A lot of the equipment we used to buy years ago came self-contained, licensing, whatever storage was in that device was fixed. You couldn't get something off the shelf and upgrade it. Some of that was built in how the operating system needed to control things. But there are a lot of offerings today that are very open architecture, and you can virtually go in and replace anything within that piece of hardware to keep it up to date. So essentially, after a number of years, the only thing that may remain that's original is the chassis that holds all of the components inside. You've upgraded the software, you've upgraded the storage to match some of the higher resolution cameras now that take a lot more storage. So you can keep that 90-day video retention for your, if that's your standard. It's definitely one I recommend for branches, data centers, cash counting facilities, and that sort of thing. For general administrative facilities, industry standard tends to be anywhere from 30 to 90 days. Being able to keep your equipment refreshed with off-the-shelf upgrades, one, keeps your costs down and keeps your equipment performing at a high level much longer. And again, you get all those patching fixes and all that taken care of for you, so you can focus your efforts on other types of things that you need to do throughout the day and maintain other types of equipment. Next slide, please, Kyle. Having that secure interface with your vendor is a great part of that managed service. Having the tools to be able to do that, even using your smartphone to access data, if you get that difficult question and being able to pull that up is a huge advantage for you. So I'd recommend you demand this of whatever vendor you choose. CSG certainly offers this, but others do as well. You can also get a bit of a dashboard to see exactly where the various services are taking place, what's the timing of those, what's outstanding, what might you need to push a little bit if something has slowed down. May be a good reason for that, but it allows you to check on that before it gets escalated up and becomes a greater issue. Next slide, Kyle. Implementing a new platform or system component can feel like the old equating with eating an elephant. How do you best do that? One bite at a time. That's definitely how to implement a new platform. I've personally had difficulties with this before. You make that great investment. It's almost like an assembly line. You know the hardware, you know the software for a given platform. It seems too daunting or painful to change to a new one, even though you would prefer to. One great way to do that is to get that group of stakeholders together. And first thing you do is come up with where's your business today and where do you think it's going in the future, and come up with a new list of business requirements for whatever piece of equipment that you're interested in replacing. Then taking those requirements to the marketplace and see what type of equipment is out there that matches your business requirements. And then once you select the one, do a test of the one that you think best suits your institution, working with your IT department and other partners to do that. Make sure it's going to perform well on the network, that that users of that system, you'll be able to train them easily, especially if you have a lot of users of a given piece of equipment, like investigators using a video system. Having 5 or 6 different platforms and having to train them on 5, getting them down to 1 or 2, huge advantage for you. And let's say you have that multiple platform scenario out there and you've selected that new system. It doesn't mean that you need to go through the expense all right now and replace all that hardware all at the same time. It's very difficult to get funding for something like that, but you could do it in a multi-year scenario, or when a piece of equipment fails, rather than investing in that old technology, have this new standard set up, and anytime you make an investment, you pull from that list. And eventually over time, those old platforms go away, the new platform dominates, and you're into a solid environment for the next 5 to 10 years. One thing I have noticed, I'll use access control systems as an example. Encryption is becoming much more of a standard. The regulators are starting to require it. I'm sure you've seen some of that. Everyone who hears about a new piece of technology being installed expects additional speed, additional user friendliness, that sort of thing. And certainly the new equipment generally does some of that. But for access control and encryption, it does take a fraction of a second longer than some of the older access systems that were less secure. And you can get some resistance to change with that. But I guarantee you within a couple of weeks, people like the new system. They like the stability of it, the quality of it. Maybe using different types of technology other than just cards. You can use a smartphone credential, or maybe a biometric credential, or maybe a no-touch with just utilizing your no-touch hand analysis to get in, are some examples of new technology coming down that it is becoming secure enough to keep you protected in the modern environment with the cyber risk that's out there. Next slide, please. A new service we're offering this year is what we're calling Security Counsel as a Service. Initially, I'll be the person that you'd be speaking to, and hope some of you are interested in this, but we get a lot of one-off questions from our various customers of, could you take a look at our policies? We're going to be audited in a few months, and we'd love to have an outside set of eyes take a look at our program, a set of our policies to see are we up to speed with our what the regulators want, what the industry is currently requiring, what are our peers doing. Getting past the boilerplates, we all start with a basic policy list, and generally what happens as events happen that affect our institutions, if we have a robbery or we have a morning takeover robbery, that might be the time when we take a fresh look at those policies and see if we need to add some more content in there based on what just happened to prevent things happen in the future. Someone who's had a high volume of experience with some of these might be able to add some content before you need it and help prevent things before they happen. Helping with putting that risk-based methodology together. If this is somewhat new to you, and constantly taking a look at your policies and procedures and updates to keep up with the ever-changing landscape out there. Next slide, please, Kyle. This is some of the services we'd be happy to provide with this Security Counsel reviewing. We're thinking initially of like an hour a month, build into a monthly arrangement. If you don't have a workplace violence program today, or it's very basic, with all of the concern around active shooter, having that program developed that is before, during, as threats are coming in, preventing those active shooter type events from happening, that workplace violence component in front of it. You certainly want to train all your staff on active shooter, but workplace violence is actually more important in my opinion. It gets early reporting in place. It Let your employees know that if they bring a situation up, maybe it's a domestic situation, that they're not going to lose their employment, that the company is behind them, and that a strategy can be put in place that will reduce that risk before you have violence erupt on your property. Helping you manage that growth into high-risk markets, helping you do risk modeling if you choose. And executive protection is one that's coming up more and more often. One big trend with executives is it is so easy to find out information about all of us online. And if you've ever had one of those angry members or angry customers or an outside group that is targeting your institution for whatever reason, they'll oftentimes immediately go online and start Googling everybody in the senior management and the board to find out things about them, to use as intimidating information, to leverage getting what they want. Could be nothing more than getting a fee reversed or something like that. But there are programs out there that help protect that data about executives and their families, so it's not so easily found. But I don't see people writing letters much anymore. It's all on the web and looking at social media. So evaluating your executive social media presence is super important. Next slide, please, Kyle. So that is the end of our prepared content today. If you're interested in the vendor due diligence checklist or equipment lifecycle management, having any more discussions about that, or security counsel as a service, please send me an email. I'd be happy to set up some time with you outside of the scope of this and put together recommendations specific to your institution and what you're looking for. Next slide, please, Kyle. And if you have any interest, if these branch designs pique your interest, we have experts on staff that can help with every aspect of building out these three configurations. Please send us a note at info@cooksecurity.group.com, and we'd be happy to talk with you about that. Talk about the future. Where are you going, and which one of these might fit into where you think your customer member needs are going to be in the future. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so open it up now to see if anyone has any questions in the chat. Give it just a second here. Definitely appreciate all of you being here today.
Hey, Steve. We got in a question about SOC Type 2, and they're wondering, is SOC Type 2 a regulatory requirement?
Great question, and whoever sent that in, thank you. It is not a regulatory requirement today. I'm pretty sure not everyone that you're working with has that, but in my opinion, to be safe, it should be your institution's requirement for all the vendors that you have that attach or touch your network or service equipment that is connected to your network. SOC2 Type U, I can tell you, it's just based on my experience working with it here at Cook Security Group, it is an all year long exercise. It's not just something that takes a week with an auditor coming in and looking at examples. It's a time commitment completely throughout the year. So the cost is high. That could be a good example of that vendor that comes in with an extremely low cost compared to others. One way to reduce expenses is to not have SOC2 Type 2 and not do all the required training for employees to have certifications on manufacturer's equipment and that sort of thing. So with SOC2 Type 2, you're risking data loss, and with not keeping up to date on technicians' requirements for certified training, you're risking losing manufacturer backing if a piece of equipment is still under warranty, for instance. You can jeopardize the warranty if an uncertified technician is working on a piece of equipment. So both of those are important to both quality and ultimately long-term keeping the costs down. Any other questions?
Thank you, Steve. It looks like we have one more question in right now, and they're looking for more information on why not to take advantage of the savings that maybe a lower bid would have in the RFP process.
Yep, excellent. I did just cover a lot of that, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't try to save some funds. We're all tasked to do that one with all the expenses that we make, but doing that upfront work to figure out what is the going rate for a given market can really equip you to know if you're getting the right price for the right level of quality in a given market as we go across the country. Things in remote areas generally are less expensive than in some of the higher cost cities. We all know that. But having that knowledge and then just avoiding that temptation to take that big savings, I think is a wise choice. Or definitely look into it fully and make sure you're really getting the right deal for what you're looking for.
All right, thank you, Steve. Those are all the questions that we've gotten in so far.
Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate taking the time to listen in. If there's anything else we can do to support you, you've got our contact information, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks again and have a wonderful day.